So Halloween is quickly approaching upon us, which means that me as a D&D YouTuber, I am legally obligated to talk about this thing, Curse of Strahd. I had originally planned on doing a video on this sometime last year, but whenever I tend to do a video that winds up being a whole lot of like layout and accessibility critiques, and then the points where I'm like, well, there's some of these elements in there you might want to shift around. I don't know. It didn't really hit the vibe that I was going for, that I was really wanting to make a video about in that time. Ever since then, I've had some thoughts about ways that I could maybe phrase some of those critiques. So we're going to get into that, and I'm going to offer you some tips as to how I think that this really actually fantastic situation, this scenario, feels so much better at the table. So my number one tip is going to be not to run it in D&D 5e. Reason being, D&D 5e presents characters that are going to be more superheroes of fantasy rather than rounded and kind of struggling, powered up commoners like what you had in the original Ravenloft. Generally, the player characters could be assumed to be lower hit points. The damage structure was entirely different. You were a bit more scared, really, by the monsters that were presented to you rather than D&D 5e's, I'm basically a god, so why do I really care about this vampire right here whenever I can resurrect all my buddies with a 300 gold piece diamond? There are, of course, ways that you could tweak it to run it in D&D 5e, but honestly, I think the story just works out so much better in so many other systems. And this first one's really inspired by something that AJ Pickett was telling me about vampirism, I guess it was like 3 or 4 years ago. And that is that vampirism should be thought of as some kind of an eldritch curse rather than a supernatural one. Whenever you think about vampires, or kind of more specifically necromancers are raising up skeletons and zombies, maybe a ghoul, or maybe they conjure up a ghost, but we don't typically see a necromancer in fantasy really conjure up a vampire, right? They feel like they're so much more powerful and more mysterious compared to other undead kind. So what AJ proposed, and I really do dig this idea, is running it as an eldritch curse instead. You still have the creature of the vampire, which is this host, and that is definitely like an undead, like this is the body of someone who has died and is now being taken over by this curse. But the curse itself is something that is eldritch and somewhat unknowable. And that's why I kind of think Call of Cthulhu works out really well for this. I haven't actually seen a port of it, I haven't done the legwork on that, and I'm not an expert in Call of Cthulhu, but this is an easy one to grab if you do want to go on that route. The other one is such a natural fit for this, I can't believe no one's already done it, and that's going to be Vaesen by Free League. Vaesen is, Nordic folk horror. They even have their mythic Carpathia, which is going to have the stat blocks for things like vampires in it, so it feels like it's a super easy fit. This is going to put the player characters more as kind of supernaturally powered investigators where they can at least see these creatures. A lot of Curse of Strahd slots in super easily for Vaesen if you just use the stat blocks over here. Again, it's got that same strength that Call of Cthulhu does of, I think the player characters are going to be put on more of a reasonable level of power, similar to what you're going to get out of basic expert. Now, if you've heard of Curse of Strahd and maybe you want to embrace a lot more of those darker themes and kind of delve into them a lot more, your table's all cool with it, you should check out Cult Divinity Lost. This is a PBTA style system, so 2d6 resolution. This does get a lot more into what I think might lean into ERP style play, but hey, if your table's into that, here you go. This is from Modiphius and Helmsgath Games. The artwork is stunning. The layout work on it is absolutely incredible. I haven't actually played Cult, but I know that my buddy Crow absolutely adores this thing. Now, what if your table wants to play a bunch of vampires that are going in and fucking up a colonial warmonger who is trying to take control of an entire region, maybe have a bit more long-form kind of a campaign set in more of an action movie rather than some big fantasy epic? There's nothing I can recommend better for that than Eat the Reich. You might just say Ravenloft is actually taking place in, I don't know, like the 1950s or something like that. Maybe even see Strahd as, I don't know, one of Hitler's, I don't know. I just thought of this idea and it seems so cool for like a longer form Eat the Reich campaign that I was like, I've got to at least mention this here. I love Eat the Reich. This is such a goofy ass but cool game. If you just want that sort of like crazy, violent, like fantasy of we go in and we do stupid shit and I don't really have to worry about my character absolutely dying, or if they do, it's okay because they get revived real quick. This game is just so much fun. I love Eat the Reich. But if you do decide that you want to run this as a fantasy dungeon crawler, I would actually recommend picking up the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons module. They have it in print on demand over on DriveThruRPG, and kind of using that one to guide the way that you would run this in either Shadowdark or my game, Vagabond, maybe even old school Essentials. The reason being, I like the damage structure a lot better for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons than I do for the really cartoonishly overblown D&D 5e. And the original Ravenloft book doesn't include some of the odd additions that they did in Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd at times like over gamifies stuff, and they made additions that I think actually subtract from the quality of the book and make Strahd more of a creep than this overwhelming force. I always feel like Strahd is supposed to be this more cunning tactician and just extremely cruel warmonger, but they lean so hard in at times to making Strahd just like a sexual predator that it detracted away from what I think Hickman and Weiss achieved with the original Ravenloft. And that's where this next tip is actually going to step in, and that's going to be to gut the cringe. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a couple of moments in here. I'm not giving Strahd the vampire pass, where like vampires are known to do this kind of messed up stuff or whatever. Look, if we're talking about like potential like sexual themes in a book that is rated for kids like 10 and up or 12 and up, I think that stuff like that probably doesn't belong in that kind of a book. But now I hear you saying, but Taron, this kind of ruins the vision for Curse of Strahd because now we're talking about censoring some of the original writing that was absolutely brilliant and made me love this thing. This book is actually fairly low on some of these moments I'm talking about. In fact, a majority of the moments that have me going like, ugh, with this thing were completely new creations for D&D 5e. I just want to mention one here in particular, and that's the storyline involving Gertruda. Gertruda is an NPC who you discover whenever you initially enter Barovia. You don't meet her, you meet her mother, and you find out from her mother that Gertruda is a teenager who was abducted by Strahd and is now held captive in Castle Ravenloft. When you find her, she's found to be in like a nightgown with like, if I remember right, I think one of her shoes is missing or something like that, but she's in Strahd's bedchambers. And this is the thing. In Curse of Strahd, they specifically say that Gertruda is now a teenager, which is a very weird way to implicate that she just became a teenager. So she's like 13. So this is on page 68 here in the King's bedchamber. This is K42. Sweet smells waft from this delicately lit room. A great arched window along the west wall is covered by heavy red draperies. Their golden tassels glinting in the light of 3 candelabras sitting atop small tables about the room. Tall white candles burn with bright, steady light. A large bed, canopied by silk curtains, sits with its headboard against the north wall. Carved into the headboard with great skill is a large Z. Lying amid the velvet and satin sheets and bedclothes is a young woman in a nightgown. One of her dainty slippers has fallen to the floor at the bed's foot. The figure on the bed is Gertruda, neutral good, female human commoner, the daughter of Mad Mary, see Chapter 3, Area E3. Gertruda is oblivious to any danger to herself, especially from Strahd, who has charmed her. Sheltered by her mother, she was never allowed to leave home as a child. She finally slipped away and made her way to the castle drawn by its majesty. Gertruda is innocent, and years spent as a shut-in have twisted her sense of reality. Consequently, she maintains a fairy tale view of life. When faced with a decision, she almost always makes the most simplistic choice. She is naive to the point of being a danger to herself and others. Fortunately for her, Strahd has not yet bitten her, though he intends to. If he can do so while the characters look on helplessly, so much the better. The storyline wasn't the original, but her age was left to be pretty vague and ambiguous, so you're left with a lot of wiggle room here to not interpret her as explicitly a teenager. It's just a very strange choice. I don't know why they did this for Curse of Strahd, and if you're one of the people that like really wants to make sure that none of this old traditional stuff gets censored or whatever, you should be kind of pissed that Wizards of the Coast made Strahd a pedophile. There is another book that also helps out with this that does massage out a lot of this weird kind of theming going on with it called She is the Ancient. Now, this module is not just some Twitter poster going, hey, I made Strahd a woman, now pay me $20. This thing is actually a well thought out and thorough dissection and recontextualization, I guess is what we could say, of the entire Curse of Strahd through the lens of Strahd now being a woman. Another simple thing with this, like, dude, I don't know. If you want to say that I'm like simping for a goth mommy here or whatever, go for it. I just think that we don't see enough like female vampire rep in fantasy. I love what they were doing in Castlevania with Carmilla. I would love to see that more heavily represented than just here's another Nosferatu or cliche Edward Cullen type. Here, go fight him. And one of the last things here is going to be acknowledge the fact that Strahd is going to be around, right? This is a guy that's supposed to be a looming presence. I know it says this in the book several times, like reinforce the fact that Strahd could just randomly show up or he's got spies everywhere or what the hell ever. But it doesn't really give you a whole lot of tips into how to maybe make him a looming presence. If he kind of just shows up and you have him go like, hey, what's up, guys? And then he just disappears, that's not as threatening as if like Strahd comes in there with a plan. If the player characters are doing something that does draw Strahd's attention, Strahd should have something prepared as a, not just a punishment, right? Not just a, I'm going to come in and hurt you guys. It needs to be something that could potentially twist a knife in the back of the party. One of my absolute favorite suggestions came from my buddy Josiah over at Dungeon Dad. Whenever I was originally doing my research for this video, I had asked Josiah, because I knew he had run Curse of Strahd several times in a bunch of different ways. I had asked him kind of what his favorite thoughts were, favorite changes, favorite moments, and everything like that. And one of the best suggestions that he had, or this killer moment that he told me about, was, I guess the party was doing something that was pissing off Strahd, but he was just like paying no mind to them for a while until there was something that came up where I think they killed one of his servants or something. And he was like, all right, now's the time for this. So Strahd is supposed to be this cunning tactician and warmonger, right? But one of the other characteristics about him is that he's supposed to be cruel. We see this through all of the misery that's going on in Ravenloft, but we don't really directly see how cruel Strahd can be most of the time. So what Josiah comes up with is Strahd shows up, and rather than fuck them up, he does something even more cruel. And it's that he tells them all, you have to decide which one of you dies, and one of you has to be the person that killed him. You got 5 minutes. And then he just ends the session there and lets the party kind of talk about that and stew on it for the course of the week. I love that moment. I think if you have Strahd showing up at the very end as like he is always the exclamation point at the very end of a session, have him be your cliffhanger deliverer, right? Have him be the one that's making your players dread for the next week or two or month if you're an adult and like you can't play D&D more than whatever. Have them think about this and have that dread linger over them while they're trying to consider what their options are going to be. It's always one thing if you hurt the player character, but it's a totally different thing if you're actually inflicting that pain on somebody else. And whenever you're making the player characters actually turn that on another player, that's the thing. There's not enough of these like cruel twists of fate that we see in a lot of the Ravenloft material. I would love to see some more kind of twisted ideas. Like maybe there should be like a D20 table of, I don't know, Strahd's punishments or something like that. I'd love to see somebody actually come up with something like that. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Curse of Strahd. I think that this adventure has so much potential, but it's always held back by the fact of it was built for D&D 5e, or it was a conversion from something that came before it. This is one of those things where, like, if you think about it less as a traditional old school horror movie and more about embracing maybe some of the more modern aspects of cosmic horror, or really digging into the idea of Strahd's character, really thinking about him more as not this cartoonish vampire, but someone who is this otherworldly, almost like Hellraiser-esque torturer. I think there is a great story here. It's just held back by the fact of there's some pretty poor layout decisions that were made throughout the book. I don't really think that the formatting for D&D really complements running a fairly complicated module in the easiest way for DMs. The fact that there's not a dramatis persona of where all the NPCs actually are throughout the book is really bad. If I'm trying to figure out where Esmeralda is, I've got to like read through the entire book to figure out where the player characters are supposed to encounter her first. It needs something like that at the very, very bare minimum. So that's going to be about it for this one. Let me know what you all think down in the comment section below. A huge shout out to my Patreon sponsors. Thank you all so much for helping me keep the lights on around here and coffee in my blood. You all are absolute heroes. Let me know what you guys think about this format. yeah, I'd like to start making videos a bit more regularly now than take a 3-month break because summer was insane. So anyways, that's going to be it for this one. Go check out Vagabond. The pre-sale is on right now. We are quickly selling copies. So if you want to get in on the first 400 copies that are going out, let me know because orders are about to start fulfilling in October. So anyways, guys, thank you all so much for being here. I hope you all are staying safe, staying healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.